My full name is Gerard Anthony Bill, but I've always been Tony Bill because my father had the good sense not to name me Junior, and so I've been Tony. And I was born in 1940. My first image of Venice, I think probably the first time I came to Venice, was to visit a writer who lived in the canals. And so in those days, I remember pretty vividly how decrepit and kind of off the road the canals were. They had fallen into great disrepair. So the sides of the canals were all caved in. There were, refrigerators and bicycles sticking out of the water, and it was, it was a pretty sad neighborhood. But I didn't spend a lot of time in Venice. I was my life was on the east side of, sort of the east side of LA, Hollywood, and the first places that we lived were in the Hollywood Hills and in Los Feliz area. So yeah, to me the west side of LA was terra incognita for a long time. I decided to come to Venice when I could afford a cheap place to live that wasn't in Hollywood or Beverly Hills or somewhere that's kind of movie oriented. After I made a movie called The Sting in 73, 74, I started looking for a place of my own. Many of my peers, many of my friends, they would get invited to make a deal at a studio. The studio would give them an office for free, and they would come and go to that office. And they'd go by the guard at the gate, and they would be in the commissary for lunch with other people in the movie business, and that was very attractive lifestyle. But I didn't want that. I wanted a place of my own. I didn't want to be in Beverly Hills or on the lot. I didn't want to be surrounded by people in the movie business. My interests were, as I was saying, considerably different. Sailing was one. The world of art was another. So I was interested in worlds that didn't really exist in Venice in terms of the movie business. They weren't here. And Venice was very cheap in those days by standards that we think of now. And it was reasonably inexpensive by any standard because it was kind of decrepit, like canals themselves. It was not a place that people with money yearned to be plucked down and living. It was considered dangerous for good reason. It was considered, forgotten, again for good reason. The city of LA forgot about it after they bought it in the 20s. So it was the perfect place for me. It was home to or familiar to people who were musicians and writers and painters and other things that weren't filmmaking. And so unwittingly, as it turns out, looking back on it, I was the first filmmaker to move to Venice and to have to make a home in Venice, not a living home as much as a place to work. So I bought a building on Market Street, and which was much bigger than I needed, but big enough that I could grow into it if I had to. But I rented space in that building to other filmmakers. So it had about 15 offices upstairs, and so it was populated with, on a month-to-month basis, by writers, directors, producers, actors, composers, filmmakers, documentarians, commercial companies that kind of came and went, ebbed and flowed over the year. And downstairs, I had a screening room and editing rooms. So you could make a whole movie in that building and even watch it after you're finished. So that became my my life. So it's a very interesting street, and has been interesting, and has suddenly become the cynosure of Venice to be. It is going to be the street, I think, that takes up where Abbot Kinney leaves off. Well, I think that my presence in Venice as a filmmaker legitimized the concept that you don't have to be on the studio lot, and you don't have to live in Beverly Hills, and you don't have to live, Francis Coppola was my best friend. He moved to San Francisco, and he wanted me to go to San Francisco with him, and I didn't want to go that far to get out of town, so to speak. So my San Francisco was coming to Venice. John Frankenheimer was there, Hal Ashby was there, Dudley Moore, Oliver Stone was there, Costa Gavras was there, Randy Newman, just lots of people who may have become more famous now than they were then, but were very active filmmakers, composers, writers, directors. Well, across the street from my film studio was a gallery called the Ace Gallery. And the Ace Gallery was actually, the building was owned by a wonderful man and his wife, the Weissmans, who were patrons of the arts, patrons of art. And they leased that building to a guy who started a gallery called the Ace Gallery. And I just read yesterday, he's paying off the $4 or $5 million that he owes the government. He got in a lot of trouble. And so the Ace Gallery, the owner of the Ace Gallery somehow or another let it be known that he didn't want to be the owner of that gallery anymore. And so he let it be known that somehow I found out that he wanted to sell it. So I had directed Dudley Moore in 2 movies, and we'd gotten to be pretty good friends. And Dudley, unbeknownst to most people at the time, was a world-class pianist. He was world-class jazz and classical pianist. And he, of course, loved to play the piano. And he lived at the other end of Venice, down the Venice, second to last street on the Venice peninsula. And so I love eating in restaurants. I love interesting food. And I said to Dudley, Dudley, you love to play the piano. And he had no place to play. I actually met him when he wanted to find a place in Venice to practice. And I had a piano on the set of both of our movies at all times, and he just, who wouldn't want to play for other people if they've spent their life as a concert pianist? So I said, Dudley, you need a place to play, and I need a place to eat, and the building across the street from me is up for sale, or it's not up for sale, but I happen to know that it can be bought. I'll tell you what, I'll buy the building if you want to be a part of the restaurant, and we'll do a restaurant. And he said, okay, Tony. And that's how 72 was born. I had never run or owned a restaurant. I didn't know anything about the restaurant business. And I certainly wouldn't know how to give people what they want, but I knew what I wanted. I knew what kind of food I liked. I knew what kind of service I liked. I knew what kind of architecture I liked. I knew what I liked. I knew what kind of salt and pepper shakers I liked. So I said, I'll take care of the restaurant business, or populating it. And what do you think? He said, let's go. So that's how 72 was born. The manager that I hired was a waitress at another restaurant in Venice. There were only, probably in that year we opened, whatever it was, the late 80s, there were probably only 2 decent restaurants in Venice. There were none on Abbot Kinney. Abbot Kinney had not even become Abbot Kinney yet. It was Washington Way or something like that. mostly populated with kind of crappy old beach houses that were not even commercially viable. So there were only a couple of restaurants in Venice. And once again, people said, why are you doing a restaurant in Venice? It's like so far away from everything. And I used to say, well, what's it far away from? It's far away from Beverly Hills? That's not bad. Is it far away from Hollywood? What's wrong with that? So anyway, so that's how 72 was born. We hired a chef from like a deli in Hollywood. He wasn't a famous chef. And he said to me, well, what do you want to put on the menu? And I said, well, anything you want. I said, but I'll tell you what I like. I like chili. I like, what else did I tell him I liked? I told him a few things I liked. And I said, but there's one thing I like that I can never get in a restaurant, and it's meatloaf. And it was sensational, and it put the restaurant on the international map. And anybody who has ever eaten at 72 asks, can I still get the meatloaf? Because the meatloaf was absolutely fabulous, and it just became famous, and it put what they call comfort food today pretty much on the national map. And so Market Street meatloaf just became a legend. I think by being in Venice and living and working here the way I am, I have pretty much protected myself from being fawned over, treated specially, moved to the head of the line, laughed at my jokes, all the terrible things that happen to you when you're famous. They are truly a curse for the people that they're visited upon. I don't get recognized walking down the street here. I think if I had continued to live in movie land of Hollywood or Beverly Hills or wherever, it would have been a different thing. I would have been, and I don't mean recognized by people that want my autograph, I mean recognized by all the other people in the movie business who live in those places. I would have just been part of that club. So I'm not much, I have to admit that people could make the case that I'm a part of the club here because I've been here so long and because the restaurant was so famous and because my studio was so well known for what it is. But as a person, I think I've been pretty successful at being just another person. And so I think that it's kept my head pretty small. I could be wrong. I think the changes in Venice that I both foresee and look forward to, and don't know what I'm talking about because I don't know what's going to happen. Nobody does. But I think the changes in the Venice that I inhabit, which is Market Street, Windward, the Windward Circle, and the neighbors north of us up to a few blocks from here, Rose. There's a whole block of people that live in that part of Venice. I think they're in for a renaissance of community and, if you will, good taste. I think gradually interesting architecture, interesting enterprise, interesting commerce, interesting behavior, and some really kind of surprising possibilities are in store. I don't know what, but I think it's going to be all pretty much for the good.